Step into a world where ancient wisdom meets modern mysticism. Introducing the Gnostic Tarot, a powerful fusion of esoteric art and Gnostic themes designed for those who seek the ultimate gnosis. This mesmerizing deck, rich in symbolism, draws from the profound teachings of Gnosticism, serving as an ideal companion for meditation, reflection, and the exploration of spiritual realms. Whether you are a seasoned tarot enthusiast or new to the practice, the Gnostic Tarot caters to all, offering a portal to ancient wisdom and a tool for uncovering the hidden truths in your mystical journey. Unveil the mysteries, embrace the wisdom. The Gnostic Tarot is a timeless companion for your spiritual odyssey. Take a journey with Gnostic luminaries and learn their stories in a visually stunning manner. From Sophia to the Gnostic Christ, their journey is your self-discovery. Choose from the basic deck or the deluxe version, which includes a beautifully crafted journey book and a magnetic storage box, ensuring that your Gnostic Tarot remains a treasured companion on your spiritual quest. The Gnostic Tarot is an original and collaborative effort between Miguel Conner of Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio and Matthew Schmitz of Altrusian Grace Media. Visit our website to embark on your journey today. Syncrasis Publishing, where ancient wisdom and modern mysticism converge. Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Byte, and yes, get thee thy Gnostic Tarot, and tarot will be part of our conversation today. My name is Miguel Conner, and I am your Pompatus of Gnosis. So good to see everybody on this Freya day, and I hope you are enjoying the weather, unless you're in Houston, where a lot of my friends are there right now, but enjoy, and I hope you enjoy your weekend as well. So with us today, I am very excited to have Julia Gordon-Bramer, and we will be discussing a book I really enjoyed, The Occult Sylvia Plath, The Hidden Spiritual Life of the Visionary Poet. Julia, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Miguel. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you for coming. And yes, it was, although I enjoyed the book, it was one of those, where like when you watch a movie and you're like, I am ready. This time it's not going to, that final scene I know so well, it's not going to get to me. It's not going to get to me. And boom, the emotions are just as powerful as the first time you watch that movie. So it was a hard read, and of course I can relate in many ways to Sylvia's world. But before we get into that, we also have Graham Pong. Graham, how are you doing today?
Very good, very good. Looking forward to hearing the occult side of Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes. They were a couple with some real chemistry. Shame it was a little too much ammonia and bleach.
It happens. Well, Julia, you say that this is a 15-year work.
Yes.
Adventure. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I started in graduate school. I was getting my master's in fine arts in poetry and fiction. And when I was in my poetry class, I kept seeing a lot of tarot imagery in the work of Plath. And I brought it to the attention of my professor because I wanted to read more about it because, of course, I'm a professional tarot card reader. And I have been reading since I was 16. So it's in me, I know it well and I can see it. And I pointed it out to my professor and I said, look here, I've got, here's the magician and here's the high priestess and here's the empress and the emperor and blah, blah, blah. And he just looked at me bewildered and said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, but you make that your semester end project. Because he knew I knew tarot very well. He'd brought me into some of his other classes to read the tarot, in fact. And I read for a lot of my classmates. And so what became, what was my semester end project became my life's work. So when I first discovered that Sylvia Plath not only had tarot cards, but was actively, regularly using them and studying them, and had books on tarot, and was, very also into alchemy and astrology and bibliomancy, and, and Ouija boards, and goes on and on, as you know from having read the book. And so I thought, okay, nobody's talking about this. And as I got deeper into it, I realized that she had structured her book Ariel in accordance with the tarot's major arcana, and then the minor arcana ranks, and then the 4 last cards of this representing each suit. And so when one knows how to read her poems with this corresponding tarot card, and knowing the tarot card's meaning, all of a sudden it unlocks her work. Like, oh my gosh, she was doing things on multiple levels. I've got it figured out in my first book, Fixed Stars Govern a Life, Decoding Sylvia Plath. I have 6 different meanings for each poem, and she covers alchemy and astrology and history in the world and the arts and humanities and mythology and tarot and Kabbalah, and she's got all of that in each of the 40 Ariel poems, which is mind-blowing. I mean, she was a genius's genius, working on all these multiple levels, making the same set of words say 6 different things entirely. And I couldn't believe it. And I just, it's been my job ever since. I feel like I have a calling to show the world what they've missed in Plath for the last 60 years. And she's been grossly misunderstood and just kept in this box as the depressive, suicidal poet, at best a voice of early feminism, but mostly just, held into this miserable sort of circumstance. And it's crazy because Ted Hughes, her husband, was deeply into mysticism and used it in his work. And no one, and that's never been a secret. And no one, everyone looks at they find the alchemy and they find the astrology and all the myth and everything, but no one had looked at Sylvia's in the same way. And she worshiped him, and he mentored her. So it's like, how could I have been the first one to see this? It's nuts.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. That's amazing. Yeah, I consider her a witch, and I think that's a proud name to have. I see the witch as the counterpoint of the shaman in our culture.
Exactly.
It's a very honorable title. And yeah, and I can understand, because again, we're talking about my book on Elvis. I keep scratching my, how did the world miss that he was into Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall and Yogananda and all the same thing, Hermeticism, and how did the world miss it? And then I think, well, maybe it's time, or maybe it's the world it is, because as you write, her mystical side was suppressed. Like with Elvis, it wasn't suppressed, it was just laughed off. And even though Priscilla and everybody wrote about it, it was just sort of put in a corner where, the colonel didn't want to admit it and he wanted to hide it. But with Sylvia, it was her biographers afterward really suppressed it, and her estate suppressed this article.
Yeah. I think her mother was probably pretty uncomfortable with that idea. And remember that The Bell Jar, her famous novel, which continues
Right.
to sell today, is a largely autobiographical account of her having a breakdown and being institutionalized and going through electric shock treatment. And so nobody wanted her to be thought of as crazy, least of all Sylvia herself. And so, Sylvia was trying to make headway in the academic world. She was teaching at Smith for a while, and she was getting a stronger and stronger professional reputation. She was doing readings for the BBC, that sort of thing. So they wanted to keep it quiet. Remember that witchcraft was only just taken off the books as a crime in England in 1951. And this was 1956 that she and Ted Hughes got together and got married. So, not so long, there was a great stigma attached to witchcraft. And so it was not something to be spoken about in public.
Yeah, and even in we think of the 60s as a hippie free, but it was really only in certain places. The rest of the world was still very conservative and thumbed their noses at anything that
Yeah.
was woo woo or new age. So it was
And the hippies really weren't till about 68,
you're
on
right,
the
you're right.
later end.
Yeah, it was later. And then by the time Manson came, they burned out. So it was only like a couple of years when you think about it. But yeah, this is really good to hear. And as most people who are even into the esoterica, they think, Sylvia Plath. And she was, as you said, it was Ted Hughes that really brought her into the world of the occult and so forth. But she, this, she knew of this stuff before. And when you were talking, I keep thinking of that Joseph Campbell quote, the psychotic drowns where the mystic swims. And we'll talk more, but there is a risk. Sometimes you go down into the underworld or Hades or the other side. There's no guarantees you're going to make
Yeah,
it back. The shaman
yeah,
sometimes doesn't make back. The witch doesn't make it, it's a
right.
big risk, and your life, your sanity, your family are always could be the price. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Sylvia already was experienced mystical things early in her life, right? Even from being raised as a Unitarian.
Yes, yes. I mean, her father was a Freemason. Her mother got her master's degree on the famous alchemist Paracelsus, really kind of the first alchemist. And her mother has said that Sylvia read all her mother's books. Sylvia went to the Unitarian Church and wrote about doing homework on things like the zodiac, in her Sunday school, and so it was all very much a part of her. She is known to have carved this Hermetic caduceus, which is
Uh,
actually in my possession now, which is a really just
so
thrilling thing
cool.
for me to claim. And she has been, just steeped in mysticism and mythology and folk magic, and just very, very entranced by all of it from the time she was quite a little girl. And it just grew. And then with Ted Hughes there to mentor her, and Ted, I in the book I begin with both of their upbringings, which is maybe not the exciting part, but Ted Hughes fell into a fire when he was 3 and considered that his first shamanist
Oh
kind
wow.
of, experience. And his mother spoke to spirits and saw spirits, and so all of that I think is important in knowing where the two came from, and that neither of them went into this kind of a spiritual virgin, shall we say. They had had their experiences, but Ted amplified it in Sylvia many times over.
And with the Unitarian Church, that also helped, right? It gives you the ability to see there is both a transcendent God that manifests
Exactly.
in the world, that your mind has the capability of knowing this God, right? Very
Yeah.
hermetic and Gnostic.
And she grew up in New England, where the great thinkers, Emerson and Thoreau,
Yeah.
and there was a lot of transcendentalism in their history and in their literature, which she studied in her public school. And yeah, this she used to go away on summer camps, Star Island Unitarian summer camp, which I've written about. That there's a lot of legend of witches and things on Star Island, and that's kind of fun, ghosts. And but but yeah, she was full of spirituality, even long before she was an adult.
And is there could we describe what her view on the afterlife or God was, or like many of
Yeah,
us, again, it's a discovery as we go through our lives and we try to express it in words. Did Sylvia have a stance on these
right.
big
Well,
questions?
Sylvia did consider herself to be an atheist.
Hmm.
But and I've written blogs about that there are atheists who are still very spiritual. And she was perhaps the most spiritual atheist ever. That's what people have said accurately, I think. When her father died, she's been noted to say, "I'll never speak to God again." And Ted Hughes noted in their poem that Plath recorded, Dialogue Over a Ouija Board, that she didn't quite believe in an afterlife. But that said, she believed in something, because she was actively, participating in the Ouija board, in astrology, in witchy bonfires, and conjuring and cursing, and this, it was all a part of her. So there was something going on beyond the world that she could tangibly experience.
Oh, exactly. And she herself did have psychic abilities, right? You tell the audience
Yes.
about some of that.
And she wrote about her premonitions quite a bit, both in letters to her mother and in her journals. She was, sometimes Ted Hughes wrote that sometimes they were a problem for her, that they were almost too much. But she was definitely in tune, very, very aware, very, very good at sensing, and she would have dreams that she won an award, and then she would wake up and she would find maybe she won a different award or a different publication, but she knew, she was tuned into the fact that something was happening there. This happened to her a great deal.
Exactly. And also, Julia, you write that she believed in synchronicities also kind of early in her life. I don't know if she'd even read Jung by then, but she knew synchronicities were there and there were some sort of magical force.
Yes, and she read a great deal of Carl Jung, by the way. So that he was not a stranger to her as well.
No, no, no.
Yeah, they did things. They sent out their submissions to magazines and newspapers on astrologically auspicious dates, and they were very careful to kind of have the right ingredients to make the magic work. And they did a pretty good job, I'd say.
No, indeed. Again, for the audience, it wasn't like two intellectuals just like, oh, Robert Graves, the golden bow. They weren't absorbing this material. They were practicing. Even
Yeah.
when you're right, even when Ted left her for another woman towards the end of her life, she didn't waste any time and cast a hex on him, right?
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
show you.
Yeah. You don't do that to Sylvia.
No, 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 no. So she was deep into it. She was practicing. She had the psychic abilities. She was a full-blown mystic, and I'm sure that's what you want the world to know, that this is as much of her personality as anything else.
Right. People ask me about the cover of my book, and this woman holding the crystal ball is, in fact,
Yeah.
Sylvia Plath. Her mother and her got these professional portraits done with crystal balls, and I think that's so interesting that she thought it was as much of her identity, the mysticism, to get a series of portraits done holding it. And that was before Ted Hughes, also.
hmm Well, that's the thing, Julie. I remember talking to Gary Lockman about poetry. And I said, well, poets are simply the shamans of our age, because the shaman is supposed to go out into the spiritual world to get information, rewards, things that will come back and help the tribe. And you can call the spiritual world the
Yeah.
unconscious, whatever you want to. It's that imaginal place that
Uh-huh.
is beyond the material world. And that's exactly what poets do, right? They go mine
Right.
the soul to bring us back this information that helps the tribe, heals the tribe, keeps us together.
Magic has always been in words. I mean, the word spelling, when we
Yeah.
cast a spell, we're spelling the words just right. And in the Bible, they say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was
Mhm.
with God, and the Word was God. I mean, the word is all powerful here. And so absolutely poets are shamans, and Ted Hughes spoke openly of that. And Sylvia definitely believed it.
Yeah, I think on my notes you say that she called herself a archetypal wanderer. So
Oh, yeah.
she knew how the spiritual world game was played.
Yeah, yeah. She also called herself a pagan quite a number of times. But she was very, very attached to the earth and the earth symbols, and some of that goddess imagery. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, being into individuals like, excuse me, W.B. Yeats was just like Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath. He was a open magician. He wasn't trying to
Right.
hide it. And of course, once you read William Blake, he was just obvious about his Gnostic leaning. So there was precedent of this, again, magic poets, these
Yeah.
shaman poets out there who practice the occult.
That's a future book for me if somebody doesn't beat me to writing it. Yeah.
There's quite a few. There is quite a few. So, and what would did she talk about her spiritual or occult influences? Again, we mentioned W.B. Yeats, William Blake, Jung. Anybody else that
Yeah.
really moved her?
You know, she wrote a lot about the mystic poets,
Mhm.
who you've just named, D.H. Lawrence, Robert Graves, which Hughes knew after Plath had died. He became pretty good
Oh,
friends with
wow.
Robert Graves. But no, she didn't give any of them, a direct address on mysticism, just that she was obsessed with their work and that she read a lot of their work and studied it. But she never spoke so clearly. We know from a young age, Dante and Milton and all of those they became really careful studies for her. But no, she didn't say, I learned tarot from this, or I learned Kabbalah from that person. No.
Exactly, exactly. And what do you think? I guess the question would be, in fact, well, before we do that, for the audience, we've got Julia Gordon-Bramer discussing the occult Sylvia Plath. If you do have any questions, please super chat them so we can separate it from the audience. We've got a good crowd, and yeah, everybody knows their Sylvia. Everybody in the chat room is giving their perspective. So it's good to hear she still has such an amazing impact. In fact, somebody who I love very much is Lana Del Rey, and she
Uh,
has a song, Hope is a Dangerous Feeling for a Woman Like Me. It was originally called Sylvia Plath. So even the
uh-huh.
young singers are talking about
Right.
it and
Lady Gaga
expressing.
did a song for her.
Yeah. Oh,
Ryan
yeah.
Adams. There've been many songs for Sylvia Plath. Yeah.
And what do you think she symbolizes as a whole? I mean, obviously, brilliant poet, tragic life. I mean, what's do you think? What's
Well,
the overall lesson about her?
so she had a mystique. I mean, first of all, she and Ted Hughes were beautiful people. And we are a
Good
world
looking
that
couple.
loves, yeah, we love beauty. And then the tragedy of dying young, it puts you in that kind of like the Rockstar 27 club with, Kurt Cobain and Jim Morrison. And, they're in their prime, they're still beautiful. It kind of immortalizes them in that way to die young. And so there's all of that. Plath was maybe one of the first feminist voices, and she spoke openly about the hard subjects. And anger for a woman was not done really before Plath. She had
Mm.
a very unique voice for the time. Not so much now. Now we're used to that, but she was kind of a trailblazer that way. So she's held in those boxes, and she's really made a hero in those boxes. So people who are depressive, they may cling to her as sort of a heroine, and someone who just went a little too far. Feminists, put her on a pedestal that way. And sure, you can do all of that. I'm just saying there's so much more to her than those things. And then the beauty, there was a book that came out in the last several years of Plath and Anne Sexton and their martinis in Boston and their fashion, and it was very much about, you know, the beautiful early 1960s fashion, and they looked fabulous and they were really cool with their martinis and their cigarettes and their living this life that isn't led anymore, with pillbox hats and gloves, and so we have this kind of mystique that we put on that time. And she certainly is an emblem of that time, and an emblem of how hard it was to be a woman, a wife and mother, and a career person, and how those two lives conflicted, and how it ultimately cracked her up, with a lot of other influences.
Yeah. We certainly want to discuss that, but yeah, I love, like, you write, like, Ted Hughes and her go to some cottage in Ireland and all that. I'm like, ah, so jealous back then. Or they go on a boat across the
Yeah,
Atlantic. It's almost like a simpler time in a way. And of course, you're writing, well, it wasn't simple. World War II, the Soviets, the
right.
Cuban Missile. I mean, there was a lot of tension in the world.
And it wasn't simple being a woman. And I did touch on that. Like Plath, when she was in Boston, she couldn't go out at night without a male escort. She
Really?
couldn't walk down the street because that was the time in America in the 1950s, and maybe early 1960. It was a very different time, and men ruled. It was I'm trying to think of there's a TV series with Mad Men with the
I love it.
advertising agency. Yeah, it was like that. And women were just there to serve the men. And Plath really struggled because she wanted to be what society wanted for her. She wanted to be the perfect housewife and mother. And she wrote many times that Ted's career was more important than hers, and she put him on the pedestal. But she had that drive and ambition that she could not let go of for herself. Thank God, right? And she just couldn't put it away. And Ted, I think, admired that in her for at least most of their marriage. When he wanted her to maximize her poetic talent and to reach her highest potential.
Well said. Yeah, I mean, we talk about an innocent time, but we also have to be realistic. This was a time when Black people had different bathrooms and couldn't drink in the same
Right.
place. It was a time, I mean, women were not allowed even to have credit cards under their till the
Exactly.
early
Exactly.
70s. Gay people were lobotomized, very common too.
Right.
It was
And I touch on things like that too, because Plath made note of having what seemed to be, it wasn't obvious, she didn't use that word, but gay friends at school. There was definitely a gay professor that she was quite close with and worked, and he went through a terrible experience at Smith College, which I talk about in the book. She had a Black boyfriend. We don't know how deep it got, whether it was sexual or not, but it seems like it probably was. And she cared for him very deeply, I think, for some time. She also dated a Jewish guy, and there were she broke a lot of rules for that white bread Boston girl who there were expectations for her, but she was not very good at staying in the box. Something I really admire about her.
no, indeed. And Graham, do you have a question for Julia?
I was going to say the only thing that jumps out to me is her experience with Freudian therapists, and I wonder how she might have turned out if she had been entirely Jungian her whole time, as opposed to exploring that instead.
Yeah. I'm not enough of an expert on Freud to really answer that. What I can say is she was glued to Freud after her first unsuccessful suicide attempt. I say her first. She had written that she had maybe had an attempt in her earlier teens, but that's not definite. But the one that landed her in the institution when she was 20, she was reading Freud's, I can't remember the exact title of the work, but, basically mental disorders and trying to find out what was wrong with her. And she really definitely made Freud kind of a god. He is one of the key meanings in her most famous poem, Daddy, by the way. If you read just even a little bit about Freud and where he came from, the snows of the Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna, and when she says, "You can lie back now, Daddy," that's the analyst's couch. And everyone thinks it's only about her father. And then some people say, well, maybe about Ted Hughes also. But no, Daddy is a homage to Sigmund Freud, and she does it very, very well. There's a lot more in that poem too. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness is all through that poem, and it's an incredible poem, which is why we remember it. We know that the poem does something to us, but we don't always understand what and why.
Yeah, interesting. I actually had something to say what Graham said, and I hope you don't mind my little speech, but I want to reach out to the audience because, again, we are talking about some serious subjects that we want people to know and get the information. But yeah, you do right. Yeah, I think her therapist said, of course, it was sexual suppression. So told her, go play the field for a while and then see how
Right.
that works. But I always think that the biggest mistake people make, and again, I almost feel it's the same archonic force that won't let us see occult Elvis or occult Sylvia. But Jung, I think, is more popular, vital. It almost like seems even today, even after 100 years, his work seem relevant and just fresh and useful. And everybody, and you look at Sylvia Plath, really likes the idea, of course, of shadow, synchronicities, the collective, so much out there. But the one thing that people always miss is the complexes, because, and Jung said he was the most important thing of his work. He was going to call it complex psychology. Freud, who hated Jung's woo woo and stuff, loved
Okay.
complexes along with Jung. And that's the part that really helps. And I mean, I can say for myself that, I was somebody who struggled with drugs and alcohol. What many psychiatrists have labeled me a rapid cycler, manic depressive. I shouldn't even be functional. Well, some of my family thinks I'm not but anyway, I shouldn't be functional. But and like Sylvia, you're writing Julia, the pain, the isolation, losing weight. And I was like, oh my God, that was my life for years,
Oh,
just what she
wow.
was going through. And Jungian complexes really opened the door and helped me immensely. And I was reading the book going, oh, Sylvia, please, I want to go back in time and say, read about the
Yeah.
complexes, because it hit me one day that Jung does not offer a cure. And it's very hard for us to understand. What he offers is dialogue. That's all he offers us. And with complexes, you will immediately have a dialogue with your shadow, your soul, your trauma, the trauma in your life. You'll go deeper. You'll have a dialogue with the collective unconscious. Your ancestors will show up, and that's all you'll have. But once you have a dialogue, that's when you know where to pivot. And where to pivot is completely personal to you. There's no black and white, but where you pivot is where you will find your mission. And that's how you will get out of this mess. It doesn't mean you'll be happy. It doesn't mean you'll be less depressed, but it'll mean you'll integrate all of this into you, and they will be all part of your dialogue, your conversation, and they will pull you to your mission, because your ancestors, your childhood trauma, everybody wants to be part of the table, and they all know what your life mission is except your ego. That's where the pain is. So I hope you don't mind this long, but I'm just telling people, work on your complexes, because I think that's a huge part of Jungian psychology that has been overlooked. The most important one, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, had to be said, because again, did you, when you look at her life and you go, I did this kind of with Elvis. I kept singing, when was the part where they broke him, when he became the wounded healer of the shamans? I go, well, was it when his twin brother died, living in poverty? when his mother died. I mean, you go through his life and go, I wonder if this broke him. Was it the fact that bipolarism ran in his family? And I went, when did it break? And do you almost go crazy wondering when that moment is? And then sometimes you go, maybe it was just fated, because the muse is like a broken vessel. The divine seems to only speak to those of us who are really wounded. Do you feel that way with Sylvia, Julia?
Well,
I know these are
yeah,
deep questions, and I
yeah,
apologize, but
yeah. Um, Certainly some of our great voices in art have come out of pain.
mhm,
I don't think that it's the only way. I think we have a belief that artists have to suffer, and I don't think that's necessarily a true belief. I think there were some artists like Picasso who created out of a lot of joy. Salvador Dali, you know, um, these were not, they may have partied a little, but I wouldn't call them necessarily tormented people, you know? So I think we hold that idea of the suffering poet, the suffering artist, as sort of the model for how to do it, or how the greats became great. But I'm not sure that's true. Um, Ted Hughes is an example of a very successful poet. Um, yes, he suffered in his way. He really brought it on himself, though. you know, I, I, uh,
yeah.
I almost feel like he wanted to. He may have been caught up in that idea, of being the
Mhm.
shaman and throwing himself into the fire over and over and over again. The first time, literally, and so I don't know. Maybe I'm not the right one to comment on that. I think that I believe that the art, the ability to create art, is a kind of channeling, and I think that if we're open and if we can connect to that, and people do it differently, then that's art, tapping into the source,
Yeah.
whatever you may call it, the muse, you may call it God, you may call it a demon, but whatever you believe, you're opening up something, to some other aspect of consciousness. And so I just don't think it has to be all bad.
No, beautifully said. And at the same time, I mean, we all, shit happens to us as kids. Nobody has the perfect childhood or perfect teenage years, because life is life. It happens to all of us. And then
Right.
we have ancestors now, I believe, who have trauma, who are using us, and they want this to fix their stuff. The collective unconscious also needs individuation. So for Sylvia, what would you say were the times where you might think that that I don't want to say broker, but influence? I would say obviously what the death of her father Odo. You think that was the big
Otto.
one? Otto,
I
sorry.
think that, obviously that made a mark on her. It's interesting, though. Her mother has written that she was a happy child, even after that time. And if you read her child journals, she was a happy child, even after her father died. I think she probably hadn't fully processed it.
Mhm.
I think the children, she and her brother Warren, were not allowed to her father's funeral, so they
That's
didn't really
bad.
ever have that closure. And I can see that that would definitely affect you growing up. He was a chilly man. He was not very close. He wasn't a father who gave a lot of hugs and kisses. They had a regular appointment with their dad after school and after his work, where they basically did some sort of performance of schoolwork or a skit or something, and then they had to run along, and so it was really about, she learned she had to work extra hard to earn a man's love, and she got
Mm.
a lot of kind of ideas that she would carry later on to life. But I don't think she was particularly troubled until probably the bell jar era, when she was 19, 20 years old, the pressure that she put herself under with such perfectionism and such ambition. I mean, when she graduated high school, she had made a number of publications and money. I'm talking national publications that any adult writer would have envied. And she was already that successful in high school. So when we're looking at kind of the breaking point, I would say it was when she became an editor at Mademoiselle magazine in New York City when she was 19, 20 years old. And that's when the work pace, the physical demands, I mean, kind of crazy things like photo shoots in winter clothes in a hot New York summer and, things like that, food poisoning, all of the stories that you read in the bell jar. And electric shock therapy, which was kind of a common way that they handled depression back then in the 50s. She had actually asked for a lobotomy, which is something, and thank God her doctors didn't listen to her, because lobotomies were common then. And I also mentioned in my book that there was a Dr. Freeman who went around the United States in a lobotomobile, which was basically a converted ambulance that he was going from town to town doing lobotomies, sometimes on children for behavioral problems.
Oh.
And that was pretty common procedure. He did it with an ice pick. How horrible is that? Yeah.
It's like nothing changes. Yeah, today we dope them up with Ritalin. Back then, it's
Yeah.
like the ice pick.
Right. Yeah, we've always got like some kind of Neanderthal way of handling problems, don't we?
Well, those who stray away from the herd just a little bit. Oh, you're saying dangerous words. Oh, you have different sexuality.
Right.
Yeah, she hated her time at Mademoiselle, and it just wasn't her thing. But and also I think as you're talking about the overall weight of what, like German stoicism and work drive,
Yeah.
that was probably just didn't suit her
Yeah.
soul, right?
Right. And I talk also, getting back into the families, that being of German descent, her father came over on the ship, at 15-year-old boy,
Mm.
abandoned by his family, alone, had to learn a new language in a strange place, on the heels of World War I, where Germans were the enemy. And then World War II happened, and of course they were the enemy again. And when Plath was growing up, people have chastised her mother for smothering her, but this was the time when the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped and found dead not far from where they were, and so, and again, the anti-German sentiment throughout. And so there's just so much that influenced their family and her upbringing, and put a lot of pressure on her to be perfect at a time where people look down on Germans as, really disgusting, horrible people.
Yeah, it was horrible. The propaganda in World War One that said the Germans were like the Huns. They were gonna
Yeah,
kill the men and rape the women. It was really
right.
unfair, but unfortunately in war, you start with the horrible propaganda before you even start
Yeah.
shooting. It's
Yeah. Well, that's
so
it, right? I mean, war is always about dehumanizing the other side. Always.
exactly,
Yeah. We're
exactly. Or
seeing a
what
lot of it today.
exactly? You say, "Oh, well, what's the first casualty of war? The truth." That's the first thing you
Yep,
got to get off the table if you want to
that's
win and
right.
pay your contractors and all that,
That's right.
whatever dark gods were sacrificing humans to. But and yeah, and of course Otto, as you write, he was stubborn too. He did not want to go to a doctor until it was just too late.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that must have weighed on Sylvia too. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
Dad, you could have lived so many years if you'd taken care of your diabetes and gone to a
Right.
doctor. So,
Right.
and don't you write that there's sort of a unspoken law that in the Plath family, depression did affect many of its
Oh,
family
yeah.
members?
Even suicide. There
Mm.
was, I think there's a great grandmother or a grandmother who died by suicide in the Plath lineage. And there was quite a bit of depression that was not spoken of because it wasn't done back then.
No. Yeah, unfortunately, whether it was early 20th century, 1960s, we didn't have the tools.
Right?
Hopefully we do have the tools today. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know what works for me. And Graham, do you have a question? Or what do you think on your end?
No, definitely. I'm just following along. No real questions for right now. Just a lot of this is, I didn't know a lot of this about Sylvia. I thank her for sharing.
Yeah, there's so much more in the book. What about the idea of Ted Hughes being vilified afterwards? Maybe you could tell us your
Yeah.
stance, because of course, the idea of defacing her tombstone is famous, where they removed the
Right.
Hughes, and there was some friction between groups and all that. Although, again, you see that all the time, right? People vilified Yoko Ono. People vilified Priscilla Presley. The spouse, this time it's the male spouse who gets the brunt of the anger.
Something I tried to do in this book was really humanize all the main characters, because Aurelia Plath, Sylvia's mother, has been vilified as being that smothering mother. Her father, Otto, has been vilified as being, cold-hearted and cruel and all of that. And Ted Hughes may be worst of all. And Ted Hughes was no prince. We know he was a philanderer. We know he ran off with Asha Wevel, who had been Sylvia's friend, a double stab in the back there. And we know that he disregarded the fact they had 2 young children. He left her high and dry. He was awful. And he went on to be awful to Asya, who killed herself and their daughter, which, the guilt that Ted Hughes had to live with was big after Asya died. It was bad after Sylvia, but I think Asya just put him over the edge. I try to show all their humanity. And I attempt to do that, especially by where they come from. So when I got into Otto's history, I thought that was really important. And it, as I said, it might not be the most exciting part of the book. And I can imagine some Plath readers like, I want to get to Sylvia and Ted, Of course you do. And it's coming. but to understand that family history and where they come from, and how they were made. Aurelia, also of German Austrian heritage. She went to school and they called her Spy Face, and tossed her off the bus because of this anti-German sentiment. So I tried to show all of these factors. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping. Of course, Aurelia would be holding on to her little girl tightly. It was a dangerous time. It was a time when Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger were riding around. These were not just, sweet, easy suburbs. And the world's always got big news stories going on, but we forget it. And we forget, I think we forget the context when we're looking at Sylvia Plath. Something that I've written in my analysis of her aerial poems, the October poems that she wrote, which are really her most famous, they came out during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and when we thought it was the end of the world. And they really strongly reflect all of that. And so I have a lot of that history in the world context in my analysis of her poems. The poem analysis is in a different book. That's in my first book, Fixed Stars Govern a Life, Decoding Sylvia Plath. And then I've also got 2 separate books, Decoding Sylvia Plath's Daddy and Decoding Sylvia Plath's Lady Lazarus. I'm intending to do more, but I've just been so busy. But I wanted to get the greatest hits out there. But the Occult Sylvia Plath was intended to be the introduction to my first book. And I'll show you what it looks like just to It's out
Sure.
of print now, but I do sell the PDF for $5 US dollars. If anyone wants to send me an email if they're interested in getting into the poetry analysis. But the Occult Sylvia Plath started as the introduction to Fixed Stars Govern a Life. Whoops, get it in front of the camera, right?
There you go. There you go.
And it became its own thing. So I just kept finding things and finding things. And as I said, this is 15 years of work now.
Yeah, very, very excited. Yeah. So, I mean, Ted, yeah, he got vilified, but he still had a very, very rewarding career.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Poet laureate of England.
whew. So he got there, yeah, but of course there were struggles like him trying to stop the movie about Sylvia Plath and
Yeah.
just sort of family drama. And then what's the daughter Frida having her issues, poor thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, even your book talks about, of course, the horrific event of how Sylvia left the material world, but you talk about sort of what happens later on. You take it all
Right.
the way, different family members until their
My
story ends.
my part 4, it's called After Plath.
After Plath.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I love, but even Ted's ideas are fascinating. And maybe you could share real quickly, but his ideas of Shakespeare being some Gnostic revealer and all that. I mean, he really went down that road hard, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, and that's all in Shakespeare and the Goddess of Complete
Yeah.
Being, and he really spelled out a lot of what he and Sylvia did within that book. Also in his book, Winter Pollen, you're gonna see, some essays on Plath and how they thought. He revealed more in Shakespeare and the Goddess of Complete Being, but as he had said, and I'm paraphrasing, the world was too dumb to see what was right in front of them.
Yeah, he threw it all in the kitchen sink because in parts of your book, I mean, they were, according to him, they were having conversations not just about great poets, but occultists like Blavatsky and Crowley and all that. I mean, they had their finger on the whole Western esotericism too. I think in one part, Ted Hughes talks about, or I don't know where, that she had a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Obviously, Hinduism that also influenced too, right, Julia?
Yeah, Hinduism. She worked in the Harvard Department for Sanskrit Studies. Had influences there. A pretty broad range. I think again for an atheist, she was really deep into a lot of different kinds of spirituality. Uh, Buddhism. Ted Hughes was working on the Book of the Dead with a Chinese man he met in Yado, the arts colony, it just goes on and on. I mean, the influences are everywhere, and what I did was attempt to gather them collectively. All the scholars and readers have seen it, but I think no one has seen it collectively and in context. And I think having my mystical background myself, I just had to clarify it for everyone.
Indeed, and it's the same with the occult Jim Morrison, the occult Elvis Presley. It's like it's always helps when we eat our own dog food, right? And I love the part where you write how Ted Hughes went to Tehran one time to give a talk and fell in love with Zoroastrianism, Manichaeanism. And then he said he wanted to be a Sufi, or if he
Yeah.
had another life, he would have just been a Sufi. So fascinating character.
Yeah, he sure was. Yeah, not a boring man.
Oh, no, no. I would, God, if I could just have coffee with Sylvia and Ted for an hour, I think I might be the
Right.
happiest person in the world, right?
Yeah. I had told my husband I wished I'd met Ted Hughes. We were alive at the same time, and if I had been on the ball and really doing this work at a younger age, and my husband just said, "Nah, he probably would have ended up in his bed," because every woman did.
Oh, okay. Well, if I was younger and Sylvia came around, it was beautiful, very hypnotic in her facade. So, handsome couple, very handsome couple
Yeah.
indeed. So, well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's see, as we get towards the end, I do have, let's see, where is it? There is your website,
Yes.
juliagordonbramer.com. Obviously, people can get the Occult Sylvia Plath bookstores, Amazon, through the Inner Traditions website. What can people find out at your website? What else do you offer?
So I am a professional tarot card reader. So if they wanted a reading, they can click on that. They can, of course, find links to my books and information there. There's a blog that I am not so great on keeping updated, but I'm trying to be better. Let's see what else. There's some pictures and some articles and some media clips, that sort of thing. Yeah.
So tarot is basically your
Tarot is my
Clark Kent
full-time.
job.
Yep.
Your
It's my
Clark Kent
full-time
job.
profession.
Okay, okay. Well, yeah, definitely check it out. Graham, any last question from you as we wrap it up?
No, I've just I was fairly conversant with Ted Hughes, and it's very great to hear the other side of that explosive relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
If I could just mention my other book really quick.
Sure, of
I had
course.
a book that came out in November, Tarot Life Lessons. And this is my real life stories of being a professional tarot card reader. It came from my journals. So over the many years that I've been doing this, I would write down the stories that blew me away, that I did not want to forget. And I usually wrote down what cards came up that revealed different things. So in 2020, I put it together as a book, and I sent it out to Inner Traditions, and they snatched it right up, and then quickly gave me the contract after for the Occult Sylvia Plath. So these books are within 6 months apart, so they're
Oh, wow.
both very new, and I'm doing a book tour for both books. And but anybody who's interested in the tarot, I wrote a tarot book like one that I have never seen before. This is not just another how to read tarot, not just what the cards mean. This is really active stories and how the cards have revealed murders and scam artists and gold diggers, and stories of all kinds of things, children dying. There was manslaughter cover up,
Wow.
crazy things that blew my mind. And I wanted to show what it's like to be me, a professional tarot card reader, and how I sort of process these things, and my wrestling with people and occasionally judging people and trying not to. So that's a whole other book. I also do talk I have put a story to each of the major arcana cards, just as Sylvia did. And the first story with the Fool card is my own story. And you will read a little bit about my work with Sylvia Plath in Tarot Life Lessons as well. And both Tarot Life Lessons and the Occult Sylvia Plath are on audiobook. And I read them in my own voice because I couldn't stand the thought of somebody else reading my words.
Well, there you go. Yes, for the audience, obviously check out her website. Let me put it back up real quick. JuliaGordonBramer.com. I will have it on the show notes on YouTube, website, iTunes, all that. So check it out. I highly recommend the book, and it is great that we finally have more exposure on Sylvia. I think Graham keeps dropping out. He must be having internet issues. So I will say thank you for the audience. Thank you very much for being here. Chester, thank you very much for the super chat. But Julia, thank you very much for coming on the show, and good luck with everything.
Thanks, Miguel. It was great meeting you.
Pleasure is all ours. And for everybody else, again, please have a good weekend. Please get help. If you find you're having problems, there is a solution. And you can be a mystic that is swimming in the waters where the psychotic drowns. And as I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.